Hey, welcome to the Business and Society podcast, where we explore diverse ideas about business and society with leading thinkers and practitioners. I am your host, Senthil. In this episode, we are exploring how businesses can unlock new opportunities at the intersection of sustainability and innovation. My guest today is Dr. Ivanka Visnjic. Ivanka is a professor of innovation at ESADE Business School. Her work explores how companies reinvent themselves through innovation, sustainability, and new technologies. She held visiting roles at some of the world's leading universities and previously worked with McKinsey and Company. Her work has been featured in top outlets like Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan Management Review. Ivanka, great to have you with us today, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Senthil. Great to be here.
Excellent. Um, When I was doing a quick research on your career, it seems you have accomplished quite a lot fairly quickly. Your papers won many awards and accolades. You've worked for some of the top consultancy firms. Um, Poets and Quants ranked you as 40 under 40 professors. I'm keen to understand what inspired you to pursue a scholarly career focused on innovation, particularly.
Senthil, when I think about what inspired my work, I often go back to my early years at McKinsey. I was working back then with large pharmaceutical companies, and it was my first real exposure to how difficult it is, even for the most capable companies, to innovate. And these were the companies with world-class scientists and enormous R&D budgets. And yet I saw up close how fragile adaptability and innovation becomes when you're big and successful and optimized for efficiency. And so that's the experience stayed with me. And later, during my PhD, I spent 4 years embedded inside an industrial company called Atlas Copco, going through a major business model shift from products to services. I visited subsidiaries from Belgium to China and also to Australia, studying meetings with their executives and engineers. And I observed again in real time how innovators at large established companies wrestle with forces of inertia and status quo. And that experience shaped me even more deeply. It made me curious about why some companies manage to renew themselves while others, often equally talented, just find it so hard. And these questions eventually became the foundation of my research. I wrote about what it takes for legacy companies to innovate and what my co-authors and I found and reported back in those studies that successful renewal isn't just a matter of brilliance or luck. It's really about creating organizational conditions where innovation and business performance can coexist and where companies don't have to choose between today's business and aspirations for tomorrow. And when I started collaborating with organizations like Enel and Holcim, Suzano, Lego, I noticed something else. Similar capabilities required for innovation were also the capabilities companies needed to tackle sustainability. And these were long-term vision, ecosystem collaboration, experimentation, ambidexterity. So these weren't really environmental skills, they were transformation skills. And that's where my work evolved. So the inspiration that drives me today comes from seeing sustainability as one of the biggest innovation challenges of our times, and therefore one of the biggest opportunities for renewal. And it's where competitive advantage and societal impact come together and converge with organizational learning. Perhaps most importantly, what keeps me inspired is that my work isn't theoretical. I see companies doing this. They do it slowly and imperfectly, sometimes very painfully, but they are doing it. And these pioneers give us clear signal. When companies treat sustainability as the next frontier for innovation, they don't only become more responsible, but they become stronger as organizations, as corporations. And so for me, this intersection between innovation, sustainability, and future-proofing legacy companies is endlessly fascinating. And it's where strategy meets society, or where my attention is.
Lovely. Um, you are a scholar working on the researching company sustainability commitments and the progress. There has been a lot happening over the past few months in politics, economics, trade. Give us a quick lay of the land about how businesses are doing in their sustainability commitments.
When I look at corporate sustainability landscape today, what I see is a story of uneven progress. And let me explain that through what I observe when I go inside the companies. So very often, the first thing you see are the commitments. Almost every large company has a net zero target, a circularity initiative, or an ESG roadmap. And the ambition is high, the communication is polished. But when you peel back the layers, you discover that many of these organizations are still trying to deliver these ambitions with structures, incentives, and decision-making processes designed for a very different era, one optimized for efficiency and not really for transformation. And the gap between the ambition and capability shows up everywhere. So in one company, sustainability sits in a small team reporting to communication. In another, it's treated like a compliance function, which is essential but peripheral to the core of the business itself. And leaders feel the tension and they recognize the urgency, but they also feel constrained by quarterly pressures, by legacy systems, and the value chains that they don't fully control. So those are the challenges. Now, what is encouraging is that there are companies that are closing the gap. And when we look at the aforementioned firms like Enel, Holcim, OCP, Suzano, we see a different picture emerge. These companies are not treating sustainability as a reporting exercise, but more so as a business model transformation challenge. And they are doing three things differently to kind of summarize it. The first one is that they're making sustainability goals extremely concrete, not just high-level aspirations, but operational, financial, innovation priorities. And second, they are redesigning their investment portfolios so that the sustainability isn't just a cost center, but the source of new growth, new revenue models, new services, new partnerships. The third one is that they are reorganizing internally to make this work scalable. So sustainability doesn't really live just in one department. It is woven into strategy, innovation, operations, and also integrated all down to the front line. At the same time, we saw that sustainability is starting to behave like an innovation challenge in these cases, not like a compliance challenge. And so these companies asked to deliver on two timelines at once, meeting traditional expectations on performance today while inventing solutions that may take years to mature for sustainability. And many of these solutions, like decarbonizing supply chains, circularity, clean mobility, require collaboration across the entire ecosystem, and no single firm can do it alone. And that's why the landscape feels uneven. It's not because companies don't care. It's because the challenge is really structurally difficult, and leaders are trying to solve problems that cross technological, organizational, and also societal boundaries at once. So you will see pioneers, pushing through this difficult set of challenges, and you will see other group of companies that are still there waiting to see how it can be done.
Interesting. Your idea can't be more timely. I was reading Patagonia's latest sustainability report, and the founder of Patagonia said, it has never felt more difficult. One of the central themes of your current research is to approach sustainability as an innovation challenge. Tell us a little bit about this idea.
Yes. So when companies try to advance their sustainability goal, the surprise for many leaders is that the biggest challenge isn't about reporting or frameworks, they're about innovation. And one thing that we consistently observed across the companies we studied is that a sustainability-focused strategy often requires solutions that simply do not exist yet. And that immediately puts sustainability into the territory of innovation, learning, and experimentation. And the moment that made this especially vivid for me came from the work with the performance fabrics business that produces Gore-Tex, Gore fabrics, and incidentally also a supplier to Patagonia. They wanted to use plastic recovered from coastal areas to make new high-performance materials to be used in part also in Patagonia's apparel. And the idea aligned beautifully with their sustainability priorities like cleaner oceans, circular inputs. But the reality was hard. The recycled plastic was more expensive, and the initial fabrics didn't meet the very high standards that the customer expected. So the team had to treat it like a serious innovation effort, experimenting with new material combinations, working closely with a startup that processes coastal plastic, and investing even in the recycling capacity in Costa Rica, eventually finding early customers such as outdoor brands we spoke about, who valued both sustainability story and the technical performance. And this was a reminder that sustainability-driven innovation is rarely a straight path. It requires iteration, it requires new partnerships and patience. And across sectors, two challenges kept appearing from what we were able to see. The first one is that companies have to incorporate sustainability without compromising on cost, quality, and reliability. And this is where I can absolutely relate to Mr. Chinard, the founder of Patagonia. That is super hard to do. Imagine just the level of performance that you need when you have to hit all the existing targets of performance and in addition to become sustainable. So that's number one. And some firms manage to balance this well while others struggle. For instance, a promising circular fiber technology developed by startups called RenewCell failed to scale because it couldn't reach cost competitive fast enough. The idea was very strong. They had a strong POC. They had even strong partnerships, or so they thought, with H&M and a couple of other large brands, but the economics weren't ready and a classic innovation risk has occurred. So the second thing that I want to emphasize is that many sustainability goals sit beyond the company's direct control, as mentioned earlier, especially in the supply chain. So in the construction industry, for instance, reducing emissions in cement is not something a single company can solve. Architects, developers, cities, and regulators all shape whether that becomes possible or not. In pulp and paper, for instance, logistics and downstream packaging accounts for a huge share of emissions. And across more than 100 countries, one of our partner companies, Suzano, had to figure out how to really peel down or reuse those logistics and downstream packaging challenges. So sustainability becomes really an ecosystem challenge, which means companies must innovate with others rather than alone. And pioneering companies approach this as a challenge, right? They do not approach this as a problem that cannot be tackled, but they reframe sustainability as an opportunity to tackle this challenge and to build new business out of that, and not just to reduce harm. They work with mission-oriented customers who share their goals. They looked into partners who share risks in creating new solutions. And they build long-term investment portfolios that include scalable solutions for today and exploratory bets for the future. Finally, they also create structures that allow for these small experiments to grow into the global offerings, right? A lot of these ideas actually fail, and you have to be prepared to have many experiments just to get a handful of successes. This is actually something established companies can be very good at because they have that strength and they have the scale to bear the many, many different pilots. So when we say sustainability is an innovation challenge, this is not just a metaphor. It really means that using tools of innovation like reframing, partnering, experimenting, building portfolios, managing tensions can help to make ambitious sustainability goals into technically and economically viable solutions. And the companies that understand this are the ones that turn sustainability into a source of renewal, not just a compliance.
Excellent. Ivanka, help me understand what's the difference between product level innovation and business model transformations. When I read the article you co authored, the instant thought that came in my mind is, oh, what is new in this idea? Because I grew up in southern Indian village. I remember Unilever launched some dishwashing powder that said it takes less water. So I thought, okay, these things are integrated already. But on a deep reading, I realized that you're not talking about piecemeal approaches on this SKU or other, but something different.
So when companies begin their sustainability journey, the natural instinct is to start with products like lighter packaging, recycled materials, lower emissions, a more efficient version of what exists already. And these improvements matter. They build momentum, they create quick wins. But what we see consistently in our research is that product innovation alone almost never delivers the scale of change that we need for sustainability. And at some point, companies run into the same wall. The business model itself is optimized for old world. And if you do not rethink the foundations, sustainability transformation will stall. So integrating sustainability into strategy often means revisiting the business model and not just products. For example, energy companies moving into electrical mobility need new revenue models, new customer relationships, and new service capabilities. And in these cases, the sustainability goal becomes a strategic gateway into an entirely new business, right? Different than the traditional energy generation or energy transmission and sales business. And what differentiates these business model transformations from product innovation is that they require companies to answer a different set of questions, such as what role do we want to play in a more sustainable ecosystem? Who do we need to collaborate with to make this viable? How will we generate revenues, share risks, create incentives for adoption? And what capabilities do we need that we don't currently have? And when companies make this shift, sustainability stops being about improving what we sell and it becomes redefining how we operate, partner, and grow. Another thing that stood out is that business model transformation also demands a different organizational mindset. It requires leaders who can manage uncertainty, balance today's performance with tomorrow's ambitions, and mobilize part of the company that don't normally work together. It's harder, but it's also where the real breakthrough happens. So the distinction is not necessarily product or business model. Companies often begin with products, but the ones that achieve real sustainability impact eventually end up transforming the business model as well, because that's where they unlock scale, resilience, and real long-term advantage.
Could you tell a story from a company, you call them a sustainability pioneers in your papers, that successfully leveraged the opportunities you're talking about at the nexus of sustainability and innovation?
So when we look at sustainability in large companies, what is striking is that the biggest opportunities sit right next to the biggest constraints. They're really the two sides of the same coin. So let me start with the opportunity side first. Across industries, we've seen companies use sustainability as a springboard for growth and not just as a cost of doing business. Some of them are creating entirely new markets and revenue streams. For example, the energy company I referred to earlier set ambitious goals and then built new business around smart homes and smart cities and electric mobility for cities. Through a unit dedicated to new solutions, it developed services like multifunctional street pole that can host broadband and sensors, a business electrification project that combines electric buses, solar-powered depots, and smart business bus stops. And these are not just CSR projects, they're new scalable businesses that make the sustainability vision commercially viable. And we see a similar pattern occurring in materials. Suzano, a pulp and paper company, developed a product called Eucafluff, a fluff pulp made from fast-growing eucalyptus instead of slow-growing softwood. These products that are normally used for diapers, for instance, perform better. They use less land and energy than their traditional counterparts and have been commercially successful enough that the company expects to more than quadruple its production capacity. So every gain in market share improves both financial results and sustainability outcomes. So the opportunity is very real. New markets, new services, new platforms, new business models. But those opportunities come also with serious challenges. And one persistent challenge is balancing sustainability with traditional performance metrics like cost, quality, and reliability. And going back to that example of a Gore-Tex fabrics business, for instance, it was really hard to overcome the traditional hurdles and higher input costs when creating fabrics from recovered coastal plastics. And the comparably startup Renewcell that developed a circular fiber with clear environmental benefits struggled with that cost competitiveness to the point of bankruptcy. So these cases show how hard it is to make sustainable alternatives economically viable fast. And the second challenge is that many sustainability goals are boundary spanning, sit in the value chains that need to move together. And in construction, a cement producer cannot decarbonize alone, for instance, and regulators, architects, developers all influence whether low carbon solutions are adopted. So to kind of drill again back to that question, no single actor has full control, which makes progress slower and coordination higher. But the picture is hopeful because while sustainability exposes structural challenges like economics, ecosystems, and tensions inside of the organization, it also gives significant opportunities in forms of new business markets and value creation.
So, you briefly touched upon this idea of the challenges that are embedded in value chains. Multiple studies show that a significant share of corporations' carbon footprint resides in their scope 3. Similarly, the sector I work in, agri-food space, many of the risks, human rights, slavery, child labor, lies in the deep end of the supply chains. I'm keen to understand how can businesses address this?
So one thing that becomes very clear when you study companies working seriously on sustainability is that no one can do this alone. And many of the most important sustainability challenges are outside any single company's direct control. Because of this, external collaboration stops being optional. It becomes a necessary capability. And I want to go back to illustrate this with the company that turned to electrification of mobility as one of the new business models that was to deliver sustainable performance. This is energy utility called Enel, electrical utility of Italian origins. So the story goes from the city side, their customers, as cities want cleaner transportation, but buying electrical buses is really expensive. And the infrastructure around them, like smart charging, renewable energy, digital fleet management, requires a lot of coordination. What we saw at Enel was that they, right off the bat, started collaborating with a then little-known manufacturer of electrical buses, actually the only one that was willing to talk to them at the time, a company called BYD, currently the biggest player in the electrical mobility manufacturing space. Now that's the case, but back then they were not as large. And so what Enel and BYD decided to do is to push this market to develop by creating bus as a service model. So instead of cities purchasing buses outright, the company provided the entire solution: the buses, the solar powered depots, the charging systems, and even the small bus stops. And so the cities paid only for service availability, electric mobility as a service. And this model was feasible not because of a better product, but because the right partners, Enel and BYD, came together to reshape the economics and to reduce risk for the customers. And we see this dynamic also in the construction industry. A cement producer I was referring to earlier, Holcim, realized that they cannot decarbonize without architects, developers, contractors, and regulators all shifting together with them. And in London, for example, they partnered with a developer called Canary Wharf to use low carbon materials in major urban projects. And this wasn't a simple supplier relationship. It required joint design work, testing, certification, and willingness of both sides to rethink the established processes of doing so. Across all the cases that we studied, a few patterns became clear when it comes to collaboration. The first is that companies collaborate with mission-aligned lead users, be that Canary Work in the case of Holcim, be that Patagonia in the case of Gore Fabrics. And instead of trying to convince the entire markets at once, they use these customers that share their ambition and are willing to co-develop solutions with them as a starting point. And the second thing is they involve startups and specialized partners in sustainability. And so this, in case of Gore Fabrics, was Bionic Yarn. They collaborated on ocean recovered plastic, or this could be a company like Neustark, which is a carbon capture, utilization, and storage provider in the case of Holcim, that helped Holcim to actually draw CO2 from the air and sink it into their cement to make it more sustainable. These are the types of examples of the partners that you want if you're a large company turning to sustainability. And the last one is to circle back to our point on the business models earlier, is that these partnerships become coalitions to change the entire systems of business models, not just to build or to incrementally improve a single product. So forest restorations, electrification, circular materials, these require multi-party coordination and not just one-on-one relationships. So collaborations work only if company itself is also internally aligned. And this was one of the big findings as well. Even when external partners are ready, internal silos inside the company can block progress. Companies that succeed create governance structures that allow sustainability, innovation, and the business units within the company to move together.
Excellent. So one thing I loved about your examples is these are not sectors that are easy to cut back emissions, right? They call it as hard-to-abate sectors, showing how they are progressing towards their climate ambitions or sustainability ambitions gives a lot of hope. Well, Ivanka, I think we are moving to the last section of the podcast. I call it as How I Did It. I ask all my guests 3 standard questions to learn from their life and experience. How do you manage differences of opinion?
That's a really good question. When I reflect on that one, so when you work at the intersection of innovation and sustainability, you learn that many of the differences of opinion that happen at this phase aren't really problems to eliminate, they're resources to manage. These areas usually involve certainty management, long-term horizons versus short-term horizons, and the goals that often push beyond the current business model, which is something that many business executives feel uncomfortable about. So it's natural that people come with different perspectives, incentives, and comfort levels. And one approach that has helped me over the years is to separate the problem from the solution early in the conversation. So when tensions arise, it's usually because people feel responsible for defending the solution. They feel like they are the owners of the traditional products or traditional business models rather than the owners of the problems that need to be solved. So in the case that they feel like they are owners of the solutions or the old products, they're going to be defending their business unit's approach, the technology, and the budget. But when you focus first on defining the problem clearly without jumping into how to solve it, it gives everyone permission to contribute without being defensive. So this mirrors something we've seen repeatedly in companies navigating transitions. When leaders decouple what challenges we're solving from how we're solving it in the conversation, people become much more open and creative. And a second practice I rely on is bringing evidence and learning into the discussion. In innovation and sustainability, many arguments are actually arguments about assumptions, about cost curves, customers' preferences, or technology readiness. So instead of debating opinions, I often ask questions like, how could we test this? in a cheap and rapid manner. What would we need to learn to become comfortable moving forward? And shifting really from who's right and what do we need to do to what do we need to know beforehand? And this reduces hierarchy, it invites curiosity, it turns really disagreement into exploration. The third thing that I would emphasize is that I try to create space for dissent early, before decisions get locked in. In my experience, when people have the chance to express concerns upfront, they are far more committed to the eventual path going forward when it's not something that they have had the chance to voice their concerns over. And often their dissent surfaces an important constraint that the group would have overlooked otherwise. Another thing I've learned is the importance of acknowledging the different time horizons people operate in. Some running a business unit are thinking about quarterly performance, whereas someone driving a sustainability initiative might be focused on 2030 goals. And these differences in time perspective can look like differences in values, but often they're not. They're just differences in what each person is accountable for. So naming that without judgment reduces friction. And finally, I try to stay very conscious of the language. Words like transformation, disruption, or sustainability can mean different things to different people. I find it helpful to use concrete, context-specific language, this product line, that plant, this customer segment. And this precision helps people see the same picture. So when I think about managing differences of opinions, it comes down to really a few principles, like clarifying the challenge before debating the solution, turning opinions into hypotheses to test, identifying and inviting dissent early on, and then honoring different time horizons and doing all that with a precise language and concrete language that creates shared understanding.
Seems like a very powerful framework. Thanks for sharing that. What are some of the skills essential for business leaders who are operating today?
When I think about the skills leaders need today, especially those working on innovation and sustainability, what stands out is that the challenges they face are no longer constrained within a single function or technology. They're systemic and cross organizational boundaries, value chains, time horizons. So the skills are not technical, they're integrative. It's the ability to bring everyone to the table to have a conversation, the skill to work with dual priorities or multiple priorities. So we see that basically those that are able particularly to hold two horizons in their head at once, the short and the long term, are the ones that are able to perform better. And the important kind of trait there is not to treat them as competing agendas, but as tensions to be managed. And this is something we call ambidexterity in academic research on management. This is what I would emphasize as number one. The second one is the systems thinking. So many sustainability challenges are outside of your control. So how do you manage that? How do you bring everyone at the table, as I mentioned earlier? How do you figure out what their incentives are? How do you find win-wins? And the third skill is about the ability to orchestrate partnerships. So let's assume that you have found win-wins and you have a coalition. How do you drive them forward? How do you make sure that your customer, your partner, and you are actually moving together in sync as you co-create rather than try to control each other? So sharing risks, co-creating is something that works much better. And this is really a strategic skill. Often we use the term soft skill. There's nothing soft about it. It's really about core strategy. And the fourth skill is learning agility. Things are changing so much, especially nowadays with new technologies coming in, some advancing, others failing. Being able to manage that uncertainty becomes very important. Approaching things with curiosity, ability to learn quickly, to discard challenges and failures early and create momentum. Lastly, communication that creates alignment doesn't mean polished messaging. It means breaking down complex visions into concrete implications. A plant manager has to understand what you mean by 2030 goals, or finance team has to really understand what you mean by a long-term investment portfolio. You want them to be part of that conversation, not be overwhelmed as you progress through it. So those would be the four that I would think is the most important skills.
Great. One book you recommend to our listeners?
So the book that I recommend, still one of my favorites, is How to Avoid Climate Disaster. This is written by Bill Gates. The reason why I like it is because it evokes those notions of pragmatism, solution orientation, use of technology innovation to deal with the difficult challenges of sustainability. I have to admit that I'm also writing a book myself, and it's going to be about same set of goals, except that I'm writing it more with tangible insights that refer to how we actually get companies to pick up and deal with the organizational challenges as they try to solve climate change and other sustainability related problems.
Well, congratulations. That's a great news. So when should we expect to see it in stores?
So in stores, it's still a long way to go, at least a year from now. I'm just starting, but I would love to invite your listeners to reach out if they are interested to chat about these challenges with me and co-create this book, because that's where I'm at. I'm bringing real world challenges into the writing phase.
Well, Ivanka, what a pleasure talking to you today. I appreciate you sharing insights on how integrating sustainability and innovation helps businesses achieve their sustainability commitments.
It was my pleasure, Senthil. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, that was Ivanka sharing insights on how integrating and sustainability innovation helps businesses. You have been listening to Business and Society podcast, where we explore diverse ideas about business and society with some of the influential thinkers and practitioners. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen and share it with someone interested in the intersection of business, purpose, and impact. Thanks for listening and see you next time.